Have you ever walked into a room, said nothing, did nothing wrong, and yet you could feel that someone didn't like you simply because you existed? There were eyes that wouldn't meet yours, smiles that never reached the soul, and over time the invitations faded, as if you were somehow out of place, even while staying true to yourself. The feeling of being hated without knowing why it can shake even the strongest. You try to be sincere. You try to stay quiet. You try to blend in. But there are moments when the world still turns its back. And you find yourself wondering, what did I do wrong? Or is it simply because I don't fit their mold? This video is not about defending yourself or learning how to act tough. It's a moment of honest reflection. Because sometimes people don't hate you because you're bad. They hate you because you expose something they're hiding. And sometimes you're not hated unfairly because you might have unknowingly caused someone pain. Both truths are worth looking at. In this journey, we'll explore 10 of the most hidden reasons people silently pull away from you through the lens of psychology, society, and above all, the philosophy of the Stoics. We won't play the blame game, we won't deny, and we won't try to please everyone. We'll choose what's worth keeping and learn how to let go of what no longer belongs to us. If there's a relationship in your life that broke not because of some big event, but because of things that were never said, stay with me until the end. You might find what you've lost or find yourself again, no longer needing anyone's approval. The whisper of hatred. No one is loved forever, but you have the right not to let that destroy you. There are people who once spoke your name with the warmth of familiarity, and then one day they go quiet. There are relationships you thought would walk with you for a long time, but they suddenly grow cold, withdraw, and vanish as if you had done something wrong, even though you can't name what that is. At first, you feel confused. Then comes the sadness, and at some point, the anger followed by a moment where something inside you wants to cry out, "Why do they hate me? I didn't do anything wrong." That is a real responsive defense mechanism from someone trying to protect their dignity. Because the truth is, being loved and respected is not only a natural need, it's also a subtle kind of desire we all carry within. It's not loud like lust, but it runs deep through the soul. It makes us feel worthy. It makes us believe we're living rightly. And when that love is withdrawn, when that respect disappears, we begin to doubt ourselves, doubt the world around us. But Stoic philosophy, like a cold and awakening stream, invites us to stop and look more closely. Is it really true that being hated is entirely irrational? Could it be, at least in part, that it reflects something still unsteady within you? Or on the other hand, could it be that people hate you precisely because you're too real, too bright, too grounded, that your presence exposes their weakness simply by standing next to you? There are two truths that always walk together. People can hate you because your presence reflects their own falsehood. But people can also hate you because you genuinely hurt them without even knowing it. Not all hatred is unjust, and not all silence is betrayal. Sometimes distance is simply a long, unspeakable sigh born from feelings too difficult to face. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If someone hates you for something, ask yourself if it's true, if it is change. If it's not, remain calm." This is not just advice. It is a compass for the journey you're about to take. A journey that doesn't aim to accuse anyone or turn you into a victim. It is a journey of reflection, to see what needs keeping, what needs changing, and which forms of hatred are worth embracing. Us, a test of your inner strength. Because if you can face hatred with clarity, humility, and groundedness, then no one can bring you down. And that may be the moment when you begin to feel loved from the inside out. Are you truly ready to face hatred, not to fight it, but to reflect without flinching? And if you have a story to share, drop it in the comments below so we can grow together. 1. You grew. They stayed behind. Not everyone hates you because you're talented, but there are many who simply cannot stand that you are the one who succeeded instead of them, especially if you were once beneath them, once quieter, slower, more awkward, someone they used as a reference point to feel secure about themselves. When you rise through effort, through the unseen hours of work, you don't just shift your position, you disrupt the value system they clung to in order to define who they are. For some people, your success is no longer good news. It's a threat, a mirror that reflects without mercy the years they stood still while thinking they were moving forward. They don't hate you because you brag. They hate the feeling of being surpassed. They hate the truth that you, the one who used to be behind them, are now at a level where, even if only in their minds, they must look up. There is a kind of envy that is silent, never spoken, never directly hostile. It hides beneath hollow congratulations, reluctant nods, and quiet withdrawals without explanation. You can feel it like a thin, heavy layer of air draped over every conversation. The farther you go, the more they fade. Not because you're wrong, but because you no longer stand in the place that made them feel comfortable beside you. I remember a man. He once struggled in literature class, stuttered when speaking in front of the class, and was often labeled as lacking confidence. Years later, he became a writer, then led a creative team. One day, he received a message from an old classmate, former top student. Didn't expect you to be the writing type. Not quite a compliment, not exactly an insult, but behind the words, something was crystal clear. The bitterness of seeing someone they once looked down on to move ahead. This feeling isn't just reserved for the average person. Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, once shared that he wasn't born into admiration. As a student, he was just a kid, obsessed with computers in a world that barely cared about technology. He said, "I started with nothing but curiosity. And when I succeeded, the strangest thing was not everyone was happy for me, especially the ones who used to think they were better than me." He wasn't hated for being wealthy. He was hated for breaking past the ceiling of expectation others had placed on him, one they themselves could never break. And that's something you need to learn to accept. Success doesn't just lift you up, it also digs up wounds in others that they were never ready to face. You don't need to apologize for rising, but you also don't need to shine your light into someone else's insecurity. Just as the sun doesn't have to look down to cast shadows, your job is to keep shining with quiet humility. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Don't be surprised if you're hated for doing what's right. Just keep doing what's right." That isn't a line meant to make you stand tall in pride above the world. It's a quiet whisper to remind you to stay grounded when the hands that once held yours now turn away in silence. Not everyone is betraying you. Some are just trying to make peace with a feeling of inferiority they're not yet ready to admit. Give them space if they need to step back. And if they choose to return, let your light be warm enough so they know they're still welcome. Courage, in moments like these, is not about stoic silence or quiet superiority. It's about continuing to grow, continuing to move forward, but doing so with a heart unbittered, a spirit that doesn't need validation, and the awareness that sometimes being hated is the first sign that you've stepped out of the place they were hoping to keep you in. Have you ever had to shrink yourself, hold back your growth just to stay close to someone whose comfort zone no longer matched your direction? If you've known that feeling, if you've ever walked away and traded comfort for a better version of yourself, tell that story, because your growth in silence and courage might be the one thing someone else needs to not give up on themselves, right at the edge of becoming who they were meant to be. 2. You don't play social games. They lose their power over you. Have you ever simply turned down a casual beer after work only to slowly notice that you're no longer in the loop like you once were? Have you ever chosen not to join a small talk group chat and suddenly everything important starts to go around you? No one says anything. There's no official punishment. But you know you've just dropped out of an invisible network, one where power isn't held by authority, but by soft ties and subtle obligation. Ethan Cole, a new employee transferred from a smaller Texas branch, was one of those people. He didn't care for office politics. He didn't try to belong to the morning coffee circles, didn't flatter the managers, and didn't pat backs unless it felt real. Ethan just worked. On time. Steady. Kind. But he didn't connect. And to those who were used to controlling others through social games, that was a threat. At first, they called him cold. Then they said he was distant. Eventually, no one asked for his input on ongoing projects if he never existed in the room, not because he did something wrong, but because he refused to play by rules that were never written, yet everyone silently understood. In soft social structures like these, the ones in control rarely need to speak loudly or be exceptionally skilled. They orchestrate through the feeling of belonging. They grant through invitations, glances, selective favoritism. And when you reject that, you're not just declining an invite, you're refusing their power. And they'll react like anyone who just lost power by pushing you away from the table. But here's what matters. Ethan didn't get angry. He didn't come back begging to be included. He kept working still steady, still kind. And months later, when the old team started to fracture, when politics wore everyone down and someone was needed who hadn't been pulled into the game, it was Ethan who was chosen to lead the next project. Not because he was friendly, but because he was reliable. That story doesn't just happen in small offices. Dave Chappelle, of the greatest comedians in American history, lived that same truth on the biggest stage in the world. At the peak of his fame, he walked away from a $50 million contract with Comedy Central because he felt trapped in a machine of manipulation. Stories he didn't want to tell, laughter that was being engineered, values traded for ratings. Chappelle wasn't angry. He left, quietly, without explanation. For years, he lived outside the spotlight, no talk shows, no appearances in the right circles. People said he had ruined his career. And he returned and stood taller than ever, because he became living proof of a truth. You can refuse the network and still have the world remember your name. Epictetus once said, "No one can manipulate you unless you're afraid of offending them." And that's truer now than ever when. Manipulation no longer comes through threats, but through invitations that seem friendly. If you're not afraid to be disliked, don't need applause, and don't feel uneasy standing alone, you become impossible to control. But that doesn't mean you have to be cold. True strength isn't the rejection of connection. It's the ability to be fully present, with kindness, without surrendering your inner independence. So if you're holding back from social games you know aren't true to you, keep going. But also ask yourself honestly, are you preserving your essence, or are you using isolation as a shield to avoid being seen? 3. You were too genuine. They felt exposed. There was a moment when you spoke from your heart, something you truly believed was good, honest, and perhaps necessary to wake someone up. You didn't raise your voice. You weren't preaching. It was just a soft suggestion, a truth you felt they needed to hear. But after that day, the messages slowly stopped. The gatherings you used to be part of went on without you. No one accused you of being too blunt. They just began to avoid you. Madeline Grant was one of those people. In a close group of friends that had lasted since college, she was the calm one, the quiet one, but always sincere. One night, during a reunion, She noticed her friend slipping into a spiral, staying up all night, drinking too much, spending money like she was running from something unnamed. Madeline said what she thought was right. "I think you're hurting yourself more than you realize." No judgment, no pressure, just a gentle reminder. But from that day on, the invite stopped. The same people who laughed with her at bars now laughed without her. One honest sentence turned her into the outsider, because the truth, when spoken at the wrong time or in the wrong way, doesn't inspire gratitude. It makes people feel exposed, and if they're not ready to face it, they will turn their resentment toward the one who brought the mirror. In social spaces filled with masks, where everyone is trying to maintain an image, the truth teller breaks the rhythm. You're not encouraged to be real even though everyone claims to celebrate authenticity. They want you to be honest, as long as your honesty doesn't make them see their own pretense. And this becomes even more evident in professional settings. A new employee who dares to speak up about a lack of transparency isn't praised for their integrity. They're told they don't understand company culture. Someone who questions whether a project actually works isn't recognized for critical thinking. They're labeled a troublemaker. Truth, when not handled with care, doesn't make you the enlightened one. It makes you the unwanted one. Seneca once wrote, "Live truthfully, but not in a way that wounds others with your truth." That philosophy doesn't tell you to stay silent. It reminds you that truth lives not only in what you say, but in when, how, and whether the person in front of you is ready to receive it. Sometimes, truth needs to be wrapped in kindness. Sometimes, it must wait not because you fear it, but because you respect it. And sometimes, it needs to be held gently until the other person opens their heart enough for it to live inside them. Courage here means listening before you speak, reading the eyes, sensing the fear behind the humor, seeing the walls they've built to avoid facing themselves. And only then choosing to deliver the truth, not like a blade, but like a small lantern in the dark. The same truth can either make someone shut down or open up. Are you using truth like a clean, cut sharp, quick, unforgiving because you think your good intentions will earn you grace? Or have you forgotten that sometimes sincerity isn't about saying what's right? It's about knowing when someone is strong enough to receive it without breaking. If you've ever lost someone simply because you spoke the truth, share that story. It might help someone else let go of the bitterness of being pushed away and instead understand that they've reached the edge of a friendship that needed to quiet down, so that one day it could return, more real than before. 4. You dared to say, no, they felt hurt. I used to think that if I were kind enough, sincere enough, present enough, people would choose to keep me in their lives. I used to say yes nearly every time someone needed me, whether I had time or not, whether it meant putting off something important of my own or not. I thought I was building connection. I believed I was living the right way, until one day I said no. Not out of anger, not because I had changed. That day I was simply tired, exhausted from nights without sleep because of work, pressure, and the weight of trying to figure myself out. That friend messaged me, "Are you free tonight? I need help moving some heavy stuff." I looked at the text, feeling like I was the one needing help, and I replied, "I don't think I can today. I'm honestly really worn out." Just that one sentence. They wrote back, "It's okay." And then, nothing. No check-ins, no invites, no more presents. I didn't understand, but I could feel it. I had been removed from the circle just because I stopped saying yes. I used to be someone who tried so hard never to disappoint anyone. But I didn't realize that kindness without boundaries eventually gets treated like obligation. And when you pull back, even for the most legitimate reason, it makes people feel like they've lost something, not a friendship, but a privilege they'd grown used to, having you say yes, no matter what. What I've learned is this: saying no isn't betrayal. It's a signal that you're growing, that you've come to understand your limits and you no longer want to drain yourself just to preserve someone else's comfort. I came across a quote from Epictetus after that happened. It gave me peace. Saying no doesn't have to come with guilt. It was then I realized I don't have to apologize for doing the right thing. That doesn't mean I've become cold or selfish. It means I'm learning to give mindfully instead of being pulled by the expectations of others. And if someone drifts away because I no longer bend the way I used to, then maybe. The relationship was never rooted in understanding, but in convenience. I've begun learning to say no, gently, but with clarity. I don't resist. I don't grow defensive. I just don't nod anymore if the cost is my sleep, my peace, my energy. And strangely, it was only when I stopped that I began to clearly see which relationships were built on love and which ones only stood on usefulness. Have you ever been like me, lying awake after saying no, wondering if you've become cold, selfish? If you know that feeling, tell your story, because not everyone needs you to always be there. But someone out there might need to see a person who's brave enough to say no and still see kindness in their own reflection. 5. You were kind, so they dumped their pain on you. I used to believe that if I was gentle enough, patient enough, calm enough, others would eventually stop being angry. That if I chose silence, the storms inside them would subside. I thought I was helping to keep the peace. I believed I was letting them release, until I began to feel drained, not because someone shouted in my face, but because something inside me was slowly being taken away. I once worked in a high-pressure team. There was someone smart, talented, well-liked by our boss, but also known for his temper. He never snapped at management, never raised his voice at those he deemed more competent. But every time something went wrong, he turned to me, sometimes with a passive-aggressive comment, sometimes with a hard stare across the room, once with a full-on outburst for a mistake that wasn't mine. I stayed silent. I smiled. I thought, I can take it, as long as things stay smooth, and I took it for months. I wasn't weak, but I had allowed others to think that because I didn't push back, they could unload on me without thinking twice. I became the emotional lightning rod for unresolved frustrations simply because I didn't retaliate. And then one day, after a meeting where he blamed me again, this time for not asking ahead of time about a change he himself forgot to mention, I went home, looked in the mirror, and couldn't recognize my own face. Not because I was sad, but because I had nothing left to say. I wasn't angry, I wasn't hurt. I just felt hollow. That's when I understood. Being kind doesn't mean staying silent, and keeping the peace doesn't mean carrying someone else's storm. When people are wounded, they don't usually lash out at the strong. They release it onto the gentle, because they know you won't hit back. You'll understand. But the cost of that understanding is sometimes your self-respect. I revisited a line from Marcus Aurelius. He wrote, "The noble soul does not react, but does not allow violation." And I realized, stillness doesn't mean surrender. Patience doesn't mean abandoning yourself. And if someone is used to dumping their anger onto mates, not healing I'm giving them, I'm helping them escape accountability. For me, courage began the first time I walked away, not with an explanation, not with rage. I simply stood up after a meeting thick with blame, closed my laptop, and stepped outside. They said I had changed. I didn't feel changed. I just felt like I had finally returned to myself. Are you truly holding peace, or are you holding someone else's rage just so they can feel lighter. Have you ever mistaken kindness for quiet suffering? If you've ever been there thinking your silence was helping someone tell that story, because someone else, standing in the middle of a storm, might finally realize strength isn't always standing still. Sometimes, walking out of the noise is the clearest voice of someone who no longer needs to suffer to prove they're good. 6. They misunderstood you because you communicated poorly. We often believe that kindness, if it's sincere enough, doesn't need to be spoken. That presence, if it's wholehearted, will be felt, even in silence. But the truth is, the world cannot read what you never say. And sometimes, the things you guard most carefully inside you are exactly what hurt others, simply because they can't reach them. Silence isn't always peace. In the space between human hearts, a lack of communication doesn't create quiet, it creates misunderstanding. And when misunderstandings linger long enough, they slowly erode even the most genuine connections. Elliot Rayner always thought of himself as someone who cared deeply. He wasn't good at expressing it, but he always paid attention in quiet ways. When a friend went through a breakup, he didn't text but left a beautiful notebook on her doorstep the next day. When a coworker was falling apart, he didn't ask questions but showed up every morning with her favorite coffee placed silently on her desk. He thought, they'll understand. But one day, that friend stopped inviting him. Another person bluntly said, you always seem detached, like you're not being real. Elliot didn't argue, he just felt confused. Because to him, nothing had ever been fake. He just didn't know how to say it. And Elliot isn't the only one to live inside misunderstandings born from silence. Keanu Riveza, quiet man in the loudest town on earth, was once called weird, isolated, distant. A photo of him eating alone on a park bench became the meme "Sad Keanu," spreading across the internet. People projected sorrow onto him, then pitied him for the loneliness they imagined. But when asked, Keanu calmly replied, I'm not sad, I was just eating. He didn't protest, didn't explain, and he did nothing to stop the wave of misunderstanding from spreading. His stillness, though harmless, was interpreted as distance. Seneca once wrote, silence is not always wisdom, sometimes it's negligence, because you may carry goodwill in your heart, but if you don't speak it, no one will know. And if you let someone live too long in that not knowing, they may walk away, not because you're bad, but because they're simply too tired of guessing whether you care. Communication is not just a skill, it's a moral responsibility. If you have something good to give it fully, not only through action, but with words. It doesn't have to be elaborate, but enough for someone to feel your présence, not just through your hands, but through a heart that dares to be clear. For Elliot and for Keanu, strength didn't mean becoming loud or abandoning their calm nature. It meant learning to speak, even just a little. I miss you. I care. I'm here if you need me. The words that feel redundant yet are exactly what someone needs to stay grounded amid uncertainty. Are you losing someone not because you were wrong, but because you never said what was right? Perhaps your silence is a safe home for you, but to them, it's a closed door they've knocked on too many times without an answer. And maybe it's time to step out and open that door with the simplest words. Because sometimes a single sentence is enough to keep someone from leaving who once thought you no longer needed them. 7. Your perfectionism makes others feel inadequate. There's a fine line between being someone who inspires and being someone who makes others feel like they're never enough. You began with good intentions. You believed that if everyone just tightened things up a little, polished their efforts a bit more, everything would improve. No one would be left behind. no one would fall short. But then you look around and realize you're standing alone. Not because you were wrong, but because people couldn't endure that perfectionist gaze every single day. Claire Rivers was the lead designer at a creative agency. She didn't raise her voice. She wasn't harsh, but she always revised. Whether it was an unbalanced layout, a phrase that lacked clarity, or simply uneven spacing between two lineages, adjusted it. At first, the team admired her precision. It felt like being led by someone with real standards. But over time, brainstorming sessions grew tense. People started speaking less, offering fewer ideas. A close colleague once whispered, "I know you mean well, but being around you for too long, I start to feel worse at what I do not, because I'm bad, but because I'm too afraid to be wrong." Claire was stunned. She never meant to make anyone feel small. She just wanted everything to be better. But in doing so, she had unintentionally sent a quiet message. Good is never good enough. And when people constantly feel like they're not enough, they stop trying. They retreat. In social psychology, the feeling of being under constant evaluation is one of the deeper reasons people avoid close relationships. 7. In the absence of open conflict. We don't always need someone to fix us. Sometimes we just need someone to see us as inhuman when we're imperfect. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Accept the world as it is, not as you wish it to be, because the world and people don't run on standards, they run on connection." You can fix a design, a presentation, a strategy, but you can't fix a human being unless you start by embracing their flaws. For perfectionists, true courage isn't about lowering the bar. It's about learning to let go of 10% of your expectations to protect 90% of the connection. Not everything that's imperfect needs correcting. Sometimes, the thing that needs changing isn't the meats. Your definition of what good enough really means. Are you truly pursuing excellence? Are you trying to control everything because you're afraid your image will suffer if something slips out of line? And if you had to choose, would you rather be the person who creates the perfect result, the person who keeps real people close? Maybe the only thing you really need to fix right now is your need to fix everything. 8. You react too emotionally. Some people aren't disliked because they're weak, but because they've made others carry their strength too many times. I used to be close with someone named Amith, kind of person you instantly liked. She was raw, real. Her emotions lived on her face. When she was happy, she laughed like a child. When she was sad, she couldn't hide it. When she was angry, she didn't mask it. That kind of sincerity made people feel close to her, safe to open up. I used to think, this is the kind of person everyone needs in their life. But over time, I started to feel tired. With Amy, everything was emotional and every emotion needed to be shared immediately. A late reply by 15 minutes made her feel abandoned. A colleague's unintentional glance in a meeting became a sign of distance. A rainy day made her feel like the world was against her. And when her mood was off, she couldn't hold it in. Everything spilled onto her social media, into group chats, through long midnight messages. No one hated Amy, but we began to pull away. Not because she was wrong, but because when everything is deep, urgent, and needs immediate understanding, her presence turns into a responsibility, a weight not everyone has the strength to carry, day after day. I had tried to listen. I'd said things like, "You can share anything, I'm here." But after the 6th, 7th time, I started developing a reflex. Every time I saw a message from her, I'd exhale, slowly bracing myself, because I knew this one wouldn't be simple either. and like many others, I began stepping back. Emotion isn't wrong, but if you don't regulate it, it becomes a burden others have to carry for you. Epictetus once wrote, "Emotion is a storm. The wise do not set sail when the sky grows wild." I thought a lot about that and about Amy. She wasn't wrong for being honest, but she didn't choose her moment. She didn't choose her space. And most importantly, she didn't choose to make others feel safe around her. There's a fine line between honesty and emotional imposition. When you say, "I'm just being real," ask yourself, is this truth swallowing someone else whole? Kanye West, of the most talented and outspoken artists of our time, is a painfully real example. He hides nothing. The world knows when he's in love, when he's furious, when he feels betrayed, when he declares himself the chosen one. And because of that, many who once admired him have quietly walked away, not because they resented his authenticity, but because being around him no longer felt peaceful. When every sentence becomes a proclamation, when every wound turns into a public war. People didn't hate Kanye, they were just tired of living in an emotional storm they didn't create. And eventually, Kanye stopped. After losing friends, partners, reputation, he vanished from social media. No more daily posts, no more explosions. When asked, he said quietly, "I lost a lot of people. And when everything got quiet again, I realized there are things I should have kept to myself." Maybe he hasn't changed completely, but even a soul as intense as Kanye learned to slow down. And maybe that's something all of us who live deeply must learn too. Courage, for those who feel intensely, isn't about becoming cold. It's about learning to pause 3 seconds before reacting, placing your hand over your chest and asking, "Does this really need to be said right now?" Maybe what you're about to say is true, but if you say it at the wrong time, to the wrong person, in the wrong way, that truth won't heal anyone. It will only push people away. 9. You don't take responsibility when you're wrong. Sometimes what drives people away isn't the wound itself. It's your pretending it never happened. I once had a manager named Nathan, polished, talented, always composed. He never yelled at anyone, never created unnecessary pressure. But he had one very small habit that, in time, I realized wasn't small at all. He never apologized. I remember one meeting clearly. Our team had an important client presentation. Nathan showed up 35 minutes Latino warning. When he walked in, he simply nodded and said, "All right, let's begin." No one said anything. No one complained. But something shifted. The room grew heavy. Every idea came out more cautiously. No one really leaned in after that. At the time I thought, it's okay, he was probably busy. But over time, when small problems came up, when a deadline was missed, he stayed silent. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't think an apology was necessary. And somewhere along the way, he and many others began to pull back. It wasn't caused by a major conflict. It came from the subtle feeling of being overlooked. The sense that if something went wrong, it would just be brushed aside with no one needing to own it. And with that, trust began to leave the room. Not with a bang, but with silence. I've been like Nathan before. I used to think that if something was minor, silence would help it pass faster. I used to hesitate, saying, I was wrong because I was afraid it would damage how I was seen. But eventually, I realized, when you don't take responsibility, you don't just lose trust, you make others feel they're not important enough for you to reflect. Seneca once wrote, "He who refuses to admit fault remains at fault forever." I remembered that line, but it took years to truly understand it through experience. That an apology doesn't make you smaller, it makes you trustworthy. And if that apology comes early enough, sincerely enough, it can save relationships you didn't even realize you were losing. No explanations, no justifications, just one sentences spoken directly from the moment you recognized your mistake. Not to be forgiven, but to let the other person know you see them. You see what slipped and you're strong enough to lay one more brick in the bridge between you. Have you ever lost some not because of what you did, but because you chose silence when you knew you were wrong? How many quiet distances have formed just because you thought, it's no big deal, no need to say it, and then never found the right moment to say it again? 10. You reflect the falseness they're hiding. Have you ever walked into a room, said nothing, joined no conversation, and yet felt the glances, the awkward smiles, the unspoken pauses? Not because you did anything, but because your very presence imply being yourself made others uncomfortable. I once knew someone like this. Name was Caleb. He worked at a media company where relationships were often as thin as an email thread. Who replies fastest, who sends the right attachment, who smiles at the right time to the right person. Caleb didn't play that game. He lived simply, no flattery, no forced friendliness. He never shared personal stories just to build rapport. He showed up on time, did his job well, and quietly left. Always kind, but never trying to blend in. At first, people called him different, then distant, and eventually strange. Over time, no one brought up Caleb in team meetings. He stopped getting picked for key projects. No one openly disliked him, but they excluded him silently. I once asked him, "Don't you feel out of place?" He just smiled. "They don't hate me because I'm wrong. They hate me because I'm not like them." And then he said something I've never forgotten. Some rooms only light up because everyone's wearing sunglasses. If you walk in showing real light, they won't see it. They'll just feel blinded. A grounded presence, when unforced and undefended, becomes a mirror. And those who have lived too long behind masks can't stand the reflection. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If your integrity makes others feel uneasy, that is not your fault." But even integrity, placed in the wrong space, can become an invisible blade. Not everyone is ready to face what's real, and many will hate you, not because you've done anything wrong, but because you make them see what they're still trying to hide. Courage isn't staying in a space that no longer fits you, is it rebellion? It's learning to stand at just the right distance, to remain yourself without forcing others to face what they're not yet prepared to see. And do you still have the courage to be real even if that truth makes you the one they choose to dislike? You've just walked with me through a journey that wasn't comfortable but necessary. Because some distances in life don't begin with words, but with something far more subtle, the feeling of being disliked. Even when you've done nothing wrong, you live honestly but are seen as distant. You stay quiet but are labeled cold. You offer feedback to help things improve, only to find yourself left out of conversations without anyone telling you why. Each chapter you've heard was a slice of that experience, not to make you defensive or change your nature, but to help you look at yourself with honesty, to realize that maybe, at times, you've unintentionally hurt someone, and also that sometimes you're hated not for doing wrong, but simply for daring to be real. Stoic philosophy doesn't teach you to become smooth or palatable. It doesn't teach you to win over others. It gives you light to know what must be changed and what must be preserved. Marcus Aurelius once said, "If someone hates you for something, examine whether it's true. If it is, change. If it isn't, stay calm." Because in the end, the real fear isn't being disliked, it's living a life where you always need permission to be yourself. If this video touched a part of you that still carries quiet discomfort, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel to keep walking this path home to yourself with more courage, more depth, and more peace through every moment you're misunderstood.